when the opportunity presents you to do something security, be conscious to take it to the highest available level. For example, for MFA, the FIDO tokens, the Ubico key, etc., they still haven't been broken. They're very, very secure. If there is an opportunity to use MFA through the application, Google Authenticator or Authy or anything else, always up to for the highest level of the technology that is available to you. So it used to require skills on programming this. It used to require high skills to develop this content. And now it just, machine learning, artificial intelligence takes the work out of it. So my favorite saying is your neighbor's kid can be an ex-hacker now, because it's all commodity toolkits.
As a leadership group, we decided that if we didn't tell the buyers if we didn't tell them what to look for and what to be on the lookout for, how would they know? We just felt like that we were in direct communication with the buyer. It was the relationship between them and us. They were sending us money. And I just think we felt a responsibility to try and help them protect themselves. And to just say, hey, here are some steps you can follow. You can't protect everybody, but here's what we believe is the best thing you can do to protect yourselves. Back in 2017, really all we knew to tell our escrow teams was to look for the things like the bad grammar and the weird sentencing and the weird phrasing. That's all we really had. And we can no longer rely on that. These are professional people who are deeply embedded in our business, real estate and mortgage. And they have really perfected how to pull the scam down. So we cannot rely anymore just on our human instinct. We had to move to some technology to assist us in that. And that's, really where Certifid, you guys came in so strong for us.
This isn't one person in a basement. This is a very sophisticated organization that is just as good at what they do as we are at what we do. And that's why it's so consistent. That's why it's so sophisticated. And that's why when you see one thing work somewhere, like we're seeing a lot of absentee seller fraud, you start to see it everywhere, because it's not an individual. These are organizations, and that's why it has to be combated so aggressively. So when we say like, oh, it's just amazing how somebody found out so quickly that something happened, it's like, well, not the first time, but eventually they figured it out, and then they built a system around it. And that's why it's so important that as soon as we start to see these trends, that we combat those trends aggressively and quickly, because when something works once, we can expect to see it more. We looked at it from a couple of other advantages. One, it saves time. From just an operational debt standpoint, the amount of time we invested in verifying instructions, getting callbacks, calling them, having to put the email on the phone, playing phone tag with customers all day long, being able to have a solution in place where we have a secure portal where we can send and receive, saved an incredible amount of operational time for our teams, in a time when things were very, very busy and we were looking for any avenue to save time.
I mean, one thing's for certain, right? The law generally in any country, and the US is no different, is always going to protect an innocent customer, even if that customer, as in the individual. So forget about big corporate entities like lenders, where there's a certain amount of assumed due diligence and responsibility that should have taken place. If someone gets duped when they're part of a real estate transaction involving, a personal, very important and critical personal asset, the law is always going to protect them, and the law will always err on the side of protecting that consumer. So I think, not only is there less assumed knowledge on the part of that person, but also, as an insurer, if we were to try and suggest that that person should have spotted this or should have, been more careful with the way they went about things. I mean, there's a big onus of proof on us to try and put that on a consumer. So I think, for us, the diligence, tough though it may be, always has to come from the corporate side, and that's either the agents flowing up to the title insurers, flowing up to the lenders. These are the people who will be expected to harness every risk mitigation tool at their disposal to protect that consumer.
How does it work? So if you take a step back, this is almost like a perfect crime, because the open public records identify typically vacant or non-improved land or unimproved land. And I never thought about this until you started to see these scams. So you can go into your county database, and the fraudsters do, they can do what's called scraping data, and they can easily, just by how the county is classifying this is either improved or unimproved, it's occupied or vacant, there will be a keyword per county that the county is using. So then they just filter those, and then they look up the information about the seller, and then they impersonate the seller. When I say impersonate the seller, I'm talking about creating, domain names with the seller in them. I'm talking about driver's licenses and state or federal issued credentials that none of us on this call or any notary that we would hire is trained to know. Did the state of Michigan or California or Utah or anywhere issue that, or is it somebody impersonating them? And typically it's the picture of the money mule with all the seller information on it. So even if it was a mail away in-person notary, they're going to pass the test. So they impersonate the seller, right? Then they reach out either through one of the feeders. So it could be Zillow, Trulia. I'm not indicting them. It's just sometimes these come through verified leads. Sometimes they come directly from a listing agent, and they'll hire a listing agent or a broker to actually list the property on the MLS where the property is located. One in Michigan that was uncovered late last week, the fraudster profiled the listing agent's sold history, saw that he had sold vacant land nearby, made up a story that said, hey, you helped the Smith family at 123 46th Street, and that was vacant. And now I have something just down the road, and I used to go to church with them, and I thought you'd be a really good contact, given your experience. So know that even they're even like softening the beach or creating some credibility with the listing agent at the time that they're asking for their services. Typically the price is either at or just below. We normally see it just below market. So if market for a vacant lot here in the West Michigan area is, let's say, $125,000, if it's buildable and stubbed in, they might say, look, I got a tax liability coming up and I'll list it for 110, or and they want a quick cash sale, light diligence. And then in almost every case that we've seen so far, there will be a request for a remote notary. They do not want to go into one of your offices, and I don't care how geographically dispersed you are. They will push back on the idea of showing up in an actual office, and they'll request a remote notary. They will either sign in front of the notary with fake credentials, and you'll get a mail away package back that, even if you use one of the national signing services, we had this recently, title agent doing anything wrong, national signing service was hired, and they showed up with really good credentials, and the mail away package was signed by the fraudster. Or in another case, this happened to be in Texas recently, they will actually impersonate the notary. So they'll find a notary, active notary commission, they'll get a stamp made, and they'll actually stamp it themselves without having to hire the notary. And then the funds are transferred, and it ends up being a wire fraud at the end of the day. Took buyer funds in, it wasn't a title defect, this was a defect in identity verification. Let's talk about maybe just some data points, Sean, and then we'll get into the video, and then we'll open this up to kind of what does success look like as we work through this awareness ladder?
Yeah, Tom, I do think it's important to note that most breaches, and you know, we've got 74% here involved the human element. We're tracking data that says it can be anywhere from 74 to 85% of all breaches worldwide are caused by the human element. And you know, Tom, you had mentioned the creating a separate firewall, and really it is the concept of a human firewall. So we've got tech firewall protection in so many different ways, and it's advancing. But if you can break through the weakest link, and that's in many of these cases, the human being, you're into the system. So I think that as long as the vulnerability of the humanness in each one of us, and these vulnerabilities that we've talked about remains, and it's the highest you know, sort of element of why companies are breached, we have to have awareness training, and we've got to get better at it. That percentage is not going down. The concept of social engineering is an interesting one. There's so much information publicly about us and what we do and how we do it. Whether it's, you know, the Facebooks of the world or Twitter, your LinkedIn, those are being used at a tremendous rate to compromise individuals and their businesses. And so we have to remember that it's not just business email compromise. You've got some social engineering driving these vulnerabilities as well. If you get an email, and many of us have gotten personal emails from a friend or relative, and it looks odd, or it says, hey, click this picture, I think you were in it, or whatever it is, that comes from social engineering. They're just finding friends that you have and colleagues, and the familiarity, the emotion. If they get the right friend or relative, you're going to click a link that comes from that person. And so these are all areas that are essentially supporting bad actors in getting in and breaching us personally and our companies.
Where does artificial intelligence fit into this now? We were talking about that, you know, last week, a little bit this morning before we started, but where does the puck move? And, you know, should we be more concerned, less concerned, you know, steady state? Where do you see that playing right now?
Yeah, right now it's a very difficult time for companies fighting these bad actors or hackers, because they're finding that if you use AI, everything that we've talked about so far becomes more automated, more regular, more aggressive. So artificial intelligence can run in a nonstop way, and it can be programmed to test vulnerabilities within your system. It can find weaknesses in code to your website. It can find weaknesses and scan your emails, and it's doing all of that now, not as a one person, you know, human being sitting in a dark room in a state-sponsored way somewhere overseas. It's now running on its own, and it's learning over time where vulnerabilities sit in code, in human activity, et cetera. So we're fighting a machine that is growing smarter and faster every single day. You'll find that companies are trying to employ AI against this. And so it's becoming AI versus AI. And we're finding that the slower companies are to move to either awareness training for their employees or AI to fight you know, cyber breaches, they're becoming more vulnerable. So I think AI is making it it's complicating the situation. It's propelling technology in even a faster way. We live in a technological environment today. It's becoming more you know, tech driven, and security is being compromised in many ways because of it. The good news is AI will also help us. It'll help Ningio develop better episodes. It will help us have better methods that employees can tap into and employ to become aware. You know, it's prevalent in training today. If you ever hear about different types of augmented learning or adaptive learning, like we've talked about it, when we know what your vulnerability is, we apply different types of training based on an algorithm. That algorithm is like machine learning, AI light, but learning today is being influenced by AI to help fight the bad actor AI. So Tom, I think it's all around us. It's sort of affecting us today, and we have to stay even more, you know, on top of these things to overcome it.
We just went through something the last 36 months, from what I call just the flurry or the tsunami of COVID to a fiscal policy that really was myopic in its focus, and how resilient the industry has been. I know we've all had to make tough changes and decisions, going from, you know, the top of fifth gear to a crawling first gear in a matter of a 60-day cycle about a year ago now. I mean, this is where it really started to set in. 75 basis points after 75 basis points, you get to that third one, and we saw kind of a spooking effect, like there was just too much change or shock in the water. And on the back side of that, what we're seeing is a resiliency that home ownership still is a primary goal and objective of new household formation, of transitional housing, because of, you know, age or marital status or whatever, jobs. But what is your office, as you think about market conditions, and you sit at a much higher level than all of us on the call here? How do you think about it? What are you hearing?
Yeah, like we this time last year, you know, this is when we do our planning for the next year, you know, and come Alta 1 is when we sort of hit the ground running. And it was very clear, you know, we heard from our members that, you know, I think the language they used, we fell off a cliff, right, in August. Things just sort of really halted dramatically. And so we really saw our role as leaning in, being able to educate people on what kind of resources we can have. Like, we're going to get you guys through this. And as you know, there are a significant amount. And to your point, even just the engagement part, people sharing their stories. One of the really good bellwether for me personally is our large agents meet regularly. And we had one of our meetings early January. And at that point, people really, it's one of the most, for me, from an industry perspective, people are very honest and open about what's happening in their businesses and how they're dealing with it, and they're sharing ideas with each other. And of course, the fraud piece has also significantly increased, right? Because when the markets tighten, the fraudsters come out, right? There's more of them, right? Everywhere. So there were a lot of these different issues. And one of the things that, and again, these are the large agents, so they've been through some of these cycles, you know, many of them have, but that's obviously, there's a significant part of our membership who haven't, right? There's some that this is the first time.
Yeah, so first cycle.
Yeah, exactly. And that's scary, right? So at this point, this was January, people were still trying to not lay people off as much as they would have. You know, they want to, obviously talent is so important, right? Developing that through the pandemic and keeping that. And so there were a lot of creative ways that people were sort of cutting hours back, or, you know, a couple of things we saw, which was really creative, innovative, was allowing people to do community service, you know, 1 day a week, and other ways that they could keep them engaged. Looking, you know, one of the things, as you know, we did on the best practices, you know, looking at how they're sort of adopting to the new ones that were rolled out in last May. And I know we'll talk about that a little bit and how that affects wire fraud. But so we saw, like I said, people had more time because, again, during the pandemic, nobody could come up for air. And they really got more engaged on the industry-wide issues that were important to them, whether it was the operations of how they're working, you know, within their organization, or on the larger regulatory efforts that they may or may not have had the time to be able to be involved with. So it was really, and of course on the fraud stuff that we're going to talk about, you know, I think our committees were more active than ever. And Jack Radican, our current president, will say he was getting weekly requests for to review folks who wanted to join that team, which we never saw that before. It was really amazing. I know. So what, you know, in some instances could have been the opposite. It became people, you know, put their head down and got to work.
This is an investigative chart that the investigator on this case created to send to law enforcement to identify what we saw. The purple accounts are the accounts we identified as Yahoo victims who had been targeted in this scheme or scam. The yellow accounts are the subjects, like personal operational accounts, right? The accounts where you can see them, right, receiving money, where you can see their day-to-day activities. Did they get a bill from their phone company? Things like that. The blue accounts are fraudulent or mimic accounts they created on our platform. There's a lot of blue accounts on here, right? And they could create 40, 100, 300 scam accounts in a day. You know, they could do that in an hour. This is, again, kind of the work we do behind the scenes to try to piece together who's talking to who and try to create a better picture when we do a referral to law enforcement of who the players are, what accounts they're operating, who they're targeting, and what accounts they're using on our platform to do the targeting.
Matt mentioned fraud. I mean, Jennifer, are you hearing more about fraud, or is fraud sort of a topic that comes up with your members? Maybe just speak to that a little bit.
Fraud is always kind of on our minds and going on in some way. What's interesting is I feel like there's trends in fraud and in crime. And so, you know, we've had things in the past. Wire fraud was something that we were really having to educate consumers about and talk about a lot. And now we're having what we call fake seller fraud, people who are calling you asking to list properties that don't actually belong to them. In my area, it's on vacant land. We're seeing a big uptick in it, I would say, over the last 12 months. So it's kind of like the new hot fraud item. We've had rental scams here as far as fraud. I mean, you know, there's just, in this digital world we live in, unfortunately, for all the great things that it affords us, it also provides a lot of opportunity for people to do some shady things. And it's our job on behalf of our clients to educate them and be on the lookout for those things.
And what is some of that education? Like, how are you trying to inform members and get the word out so that they can be more prepared?
So here in Texas, when we started to see a lot of seller fraud going on, the Texas Association of Realtors started to host some educational series for agents, because agents are the ones that really need to, when they get that call to list a property and the seller doesn't want to meet with them in person, you know, everything is digital. We needed to let them know what red flags to look for. So we've done an education series, a webinar that was really well attended.
Nice.
A lot of information has been going out amongst our brokerages, flyers, you know, little infographics, things like that. Just, you have to raise awareness, because if it's not top of mind for people when they get that call that sounds too good to be true, which, you know, as we all know, if it sounds too good to be true, it probably is. If you don't have it in the back of your brain, then you're not going to think to go through those steps and check and make sure this person is who they say they are. So we've just been trying to educate it and really keep it top of mind with our agents.
Matt, from your perspective, like how should the title agent, you know, think about deals that are coming in from the real estate agent? Is there a level of trust there that should be assumed? Is there more work to be done now when times are tight? Like how do you think about it from your seat?
So, you know, the hot topic, and Tyler, you know this, over the past several months, and Jennifer touched on it, the vacant lot fraud and the out-of-town owner fraud that's really ramped up here in the last 6 to 12 months. Our title company and what I teach and try to get other title companies to listen to is, if you get a contract in for a vacant lot, assume it's fraud. Go do your due diligence immediately. And, you know, and it's fairly simple to do. Look up who is, you know, on the tax rolls, who is the current owner? Is this the person that says that they're selling it? And find the mailing address where they're sending the tax bills. Send a letter to the actual owner and say, hey, are you really selling this property? But Jim touched on it a little bit too. A personal relationship for real estate agents with their buyers and the sellers, especially with this vacant lot. You know, one of the questions we'll ask an agent if they send us a contract for a vacant lot, do you know this person? Have you met this person in person, face to face? Or is this all, you know, I'm in LA and I own a property in Las Vegas and I can't come there and we're only going to do this via email? Those are huge red flags. You just, extra levels, extra layers of protection will keep us all safe.
And just out of curiosity, Jennifer, is that something that you're advising to members, that like they should go meet in person, or how do you handle those scenarios where, you know, they are out of state or something where they can't meet with them? Or are you suggesting that realtors actually do take that extra step today?
I mean, yeah, obviously, if you can ask if there's any way that you can get in front of them in person, if they're a fraudster, that's immediately going to weed them out right there. But you might have a seller who is legitimately living in another state. You know, I've worked with people that I know personally, and they're out of the country whenever we close or something like that. So while those cases they do happen. Can you get on FaceTime with them? I mean, you know, we're really leaning on our title partners to do some extra investigation, and they're going to have to sign some other things. So, I mean, it's really like, it's a team effort to try to make sure that if we do take one of those listings, especially on a vacant lot, that we are working with the people who say they are.
I think it speaks to that need for a partner. And one thing that I think is unique about a real estate transaction is that there are going to be multiple people involved in communicating with that buyer and seller, right? And so when you think about that partnership between the title company and the realtor, you know, how do you all think about that as sort of the, you know, connection that can work together and hopefully not point fingers in either direction, but work as a team to make sure that it's a legitimate transaction? Like, what can the title agent do for the real estate agent from your perspective, Jennifer?
Yeah, I mean, like I said, I'm relying on my title partners to help me with these type of things. You know, I'm going to do some certain things on my own. Can you text me a picture of your driver's license? Like I said, can we get on a FaceTime call? Things like that. But they have access and resources to things that I don't necessarily have. They can dig a little deeper, look at records and things that I wouldn't be able to find if I was out there searching. So it really is a partnership. I'm going to do as much as I can on my end, and I want them to do as much as they can on their end. And we're asking, if somebody does call us on a vacant lot and wants us to list it, there's a few extra hoops that seller is going to have to jump through just so we can make sure that it is the correct seller. So it's a partnership. This is like a team effort. We all want to protect the consumer. And so how can we work together to make that happen?
Where is AI in this technology taking out layers in the fraud syndicate? So clearly, if we think about the arc of this whole thing in wire fraud and real estate, and again, wire fraud, guys, I've been explaining, is just the way that they monetize social engineering. And it's tracked through BEC, which is the national cyber crime that we're tracking from a statistical standpoint. But they harvest information, they socially engineer somebody. Those two, in my opinion, are the crime. You could disagree with me, but I think the crime is already said, because wire fraud really is the voluntary transfer of funds from the victim to another account. This isn't under duress. They're not going into the Federal Reserve and hacking the reserve and redirecting in real time. These are all voluntary transfers, which makes it very, very hard on the back end to recover, and why the banks say they're not going to be responsible, because look, this was a failure to validate or verify. But early days, clearly, Stephen, they had boots on the ground, people that were part of the syndicate reading these international players on US-based real estate transactions. Mm-hmm. How do you think that has changed, and what efficiencies, if any, are they seeing now?
So back in sort of the Wild West days, as we would call it, of wire fraud, it was a much more robust group of individuals that they needed to pull off these fraud schemes, right? You needed a whole litany of people to do this, and you needed to have kind of very specific or technical skills in this area. Now you don't. That's the whole scary thing that we've seen in 2023 is the introduction of we call non-technical actors, right? You don't even need to speak English now to launch a proper wire fraud. You really don't. Again, using the AI platforms that are out there, you can type in whatever language you're used to communicating in to say, in proper American English, write this email for me. And it will. So now you don't have your person who is sitting there just writing emails. Now you don't have your person who's just sitting there, spoofing domains. It all can be done kind of by one person in a much more efficient way. Now, I'm still not saying that those organized crime groups have gone away. They still very much are operating in that way, but they've just gotten a lot more specific in what they do and how they do it using technical aspects. So they don't need to go out and get that high dollar email writer anymore. They can have one person write 30 emails a minute and launch them all out instead of having, a German speaker, a French speaker, an English speaker, whoever they want to attack. Now it's just much simpler for them to do it using this technology that's out there. And then even now, the money laundering aspect too has gotten a lot easier using some of the technical aspects that are out there.
Last year, when we saw the IC3 report, investment fraud, and that was more pig butchering, crypto scams that kind of leapt ahead a little bit of BEC. BEC was on an absolute tear as the #1 fastest growing and largest loss component of cybercrime. But when we spoke recently live, your prediction was that BEC is going to be, the front runner again. And real estate continues to be, I believe, the largest loss vector as a single industry, SIC. Is that fair still, that real estate will remain a top target? And if so, color that a little bit.
Absolutely. So as these fraud schemes have evolved, right, our threat actors have gotten smarter. They've learned more and more about the space that they're playing in, right? So before, when we first started really looking at this, they loved just targeting that down payment, the closing cost, right? They knew that was the upfront that they could see, that they could get after. But then they've realized, how many different transactions are there involved in real estate?
Yeah,
you could have 7, 8, 9, 10 transactions on one portfolio, correct?
On one transact, yeah, meaning how many transfers in and out before something is fully settled, recorded, and insured. You're exactly right, man. I mean, if it's a commercial deal, sometimes there's 20, 30 disbursements if there's a syndication of people getting paid off.
Split closing or what have you. And
yeah.
And our guys have gotten into realize.
Look at you learning the lingo and the lexicon, brother. This is fantastic.
I'm ready to go and get my real estate license here.
You got some serious chops, man. I'm gonna continue to riff. This is great.
But so our bad actors have gotten in and they've seen all the other transactions that are involved, because they're still just sitting monitoring all the email traffic, right? Our victim still doesn't know that, hey, their email's been breached. So, they talk about the closing and that went well, and our bad actor maybe failed to get that done, right? Maybe their email got caught or whatever. But then they know, hey, on the back end, they're talking about, the seller net proceeds or the mortgage payoff that's involved, coming from the same file. So they're like, oh, well, let's target those. We've even seen the real estate commissions get stolen in the same vein. So, as our threat actors have gone into it, they realize, hey, there's so much more meat on that bone. So they just keep going after it, which is why real estate is just, I would say from my experience, is probably the most vulnerable sector that's out there, because of there's so many factors that go into it. And our threat actors have really learned the space themselves.
Well, and the amount of open source information, right? And we can do a whole hour on open source, but the fact that you have an open public process to solicit offers on a property, to your point, you got multiple players involved, largest asset of people's lives. We're tracking north of almost 30% of deals are cash deals now because of interest rates. So people will take liquidity from one area, let's say the stock market, because they think it's going to be soft. They'll move it over to say, I'll buy my kid's house and I'll just have them refinance a couple of years from now. We're seeing that all the time. Or I'll just pay cash for the vacation or the second home, or I'm downsizing and I'll take the liquidity here on my net and I'll add to it. And I don't see that changing, regardless in current, the last 24 hours, the idea of the MLS and commissions, it's going to be interesting how this thing plays. But either way, there's going to be a platform and a mechanism to increase, offers in an open market area. And the concern is, like we talked about this, what other transaction can you identify that is absolutely taking place right now? And real estate's one of those only ones. Maybe a car. So, okay, you're listing a car for sale.
Yeah.
An RV, but the house is the big one.
Exactly.
Because I don't know who owns the car, but I know who owns the property, and I
Yep.
know who the agent is that's listing it.
And you know who the title company is that's going to back it. The county where the deed's going to be recorded. All of that stuff. All of that is easily harvestable, open source information.
Let's go up to 80,000 feet, and you mentioned business email compromise. In your words, just maybe explain that. We'll have hundreds of people, coming in, and some of them may be new employees to a disbursement team or escrow team. Those, we'll have some that are wire fraud victims like myself on the title side, but let's just frame business email compromise, and maybe let's start to talk about social engineering as kind of that root cause.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, so I like to boil business email compromise and sort of any cyber-enabled financial fraud down to really one thing, and it's the interception and weaponization of what I call contemporaneous and privileged information, meaning information that is timely and that you would only think that the person you're doing business with would have that information. So think about a real estate deal, right? The closing dates, all the specifics that go into it, the numerous different transactions that are going to go on with it, all the different parties. Our bad actors are stealing this, right? They're doing that through, some type of cyber breach in some way, and we can get into that later. But the main driver behind that is the social engineering they're using to weaponize that information against our victims, right? They're doing spoof domains. They're creating really well-crafted emails. They're posing as a buyer or a seller, and they're using different things to really get that trust of the victim to get that money in hand in a fraudulent means.
So how are they getting access to the email account? So when you do a post-mortem and you're working up kind of a case file, any common denominators that you're seeing, especially like this year in particular?
Yeah, so there's several common denominators that they use to get into an email account. So obviously we all know what phishing is, but in general, phishing is a targeted email to somebody where they're trying to get you to provide information that you normally wouldn't. So you get an email, for instance, that says, hey, this is your email service provider. You have 4 emails in quarantine. Click this link right here to get access to those emails to make sure it's something that's not something important that you need to look at. You think to yourself, oh yeah, that looks innocuous enough. I'll click that link. You click the link, right? It brings you to a website that looks exactly like your email service provider's web-based website, and it prompts you to put in your email address and password. You think, okay, cool. Yeah, I guess I got to log in. It's been a while. So you go and provide your email address, hit next, ask you for your password, and you provide that in, and then hit next. And then nothing really happens. It just kind of spins and then times out on you. But what did happen was, in the background, your email address and password was just broadcasted out to a bad actor, who will then go and log into your email account as soon as possible, or when you're not expecting. And they'll only log in once. This is what's kind of crazy about the whole fraud scheme, is they only log in once. And they go to your settings, and they set up settings to create email rules to auto forward out all of your emails. So any email you receive is being auto forwarded out to a different email inbox, and then that auto forwarded email is being deleted. So you're not even seeing this. This is all happening in the background. So that's one of the major ways they really like to target their attacks if they're going after somebody specific. Another way they like to get into email accounts is to simply buy data off the dark web. We've all had emails or accounts or different things that have been involved in data breaches. The one thing our bad actors want are email address and passwords, usernames and passwords. And they can buy these for pennies on the dollar and then go and try them and see if that password still works. Oftentimes, passwords haven't been changed, or if they have, they've only been changed slightly. So our bad actors can almost garner a guess to get into those accounts. So there's just a couple different ways that our threat actors are accessing that good information.
So let me recap simply. They focus in on someone's email, somebody to get email access.
Mm-hmm.
Phishing email, something comes through where they're going to harvest the username and the password. Within seconds, I understand, they go in, to your point, they log in, they make these rule changes,
and then that's it. The user doesn't really experience anything. They're not locked out of their email account. There's no suspicious activity in the email account, but behind the scenes, they're just lifting off all these communications. And then do they programmatically sift those? Do they put rules or filters in place? Like, I get several hundred emails a day. Like,
yeah,
good luck. Like, I don't want to read them.
exactly.
Somebody else, right? I mean, same thing for you. Like,
exactly.
how do they make that efficient at scale if they've got breached, you know, if they have a couple hundred emails breached, let's say that they're monitoring, or thousands, I don't know what the number is.
So they get efficient. So in those same email rules, you know, I made a blanket rule to auto forward out all of your emails, but they don't want all of your emails. They don't care about everything you're doing. They just want the good stuff. So they'll create the email rules to actually be tailored to only forward out emails that contain the word wire, account, invoice, closing, what have you. And they can get very specific. In fact, one victim, we do forensic runouts when we locate victims to see what's going on in their system. I went out and did a system with the forensic runout. And as I'm looking at the email environment, the one compromised email account had 136 separate email rules set up on the account to literally auto forward out anything that involved a client or vendor they were dealing with, so that they could intercept and go directly to the client or vendor with invoices and redirect every single invoice payment.